So, welcome everyone to today's CIPR Scotland bite-sized briefing event. I'm Sean Bell and I'm Vice Chair of the CIPR Scotland Group. I'm also Group Account Director at Stripe Communications. Today's event is about creating inclusive cultures and addressing racial inequality in the PR industry. It's a joint event in partnership with the CIPR's Diversity and Inclusion Network. Like all of the bite-sized briefings, today's session will be worth 5 CIPR CPD points. And if you'd like to join in the conversation on Twitter, the hashtag is #CIPR bitesize. If you have any questions during today's session, there's a Q&A button just at the bottom of the screen. And I'd suggest putting your video into gallery mode just using the button at the top right because it displays a little bit better. Chris Fairbairn from Holyrood PR is managing our admin today, and he's also going to be recording the session, which you'll see in your top left. Whilst today's event is completely free, we would love anyone attending to make a donation to iProvision, which is the CIPR's benevolent fund. It supports members who've lost their jobs, income, or who are really struggling, which is very important at the moment. And I think Chris is going to share a link in the chat feed below. There we go. So, today's event, I guess last month, the CIPR's Diversity and Inclusion Network published a new report, Race in PR, Being Lived Experiences in the UK PR Industry. The report follows the career journey of 17 Black, Asian and minority ethnic practitioners and shares their often harrowing experiences of racism, microaggressions, inflexible workplace cultures, and unconscious bias in the industry. The publication timing of this year-long piece of research gave it a whole new significance. It was published almost immediately after a huge surge of support for the Black Lives Matter movement, and I think that's pushed us all in some way to reassess our perceptions and our behaviours with a new level of scrutiny and focus. This month, the CIPR published its findings of an annual State of the Profession survey, which showed that ethnic diversity in the UK PR industry had only improved by 1% in the last year. 9 out of 10 PR practitioners are white, and it's becoming increasingly clear that we're an industry that fails to mirror the diverse society that we communicate with. Today, we're going to explore the implications of the Race in PR report for PR practitioners working in Scotland, and also the practical changes that can help develop more inclusive cultures to unleash talent, and also create fairer and more equal workplaces for all. I'm really delighted to say that we're joined today by Alex Louie, a long-standing member of the CIPR's Diversity and Inclusion Network and Managing Director at Think First. She has worked as a journalist. She's led communications and marketing and PR teams in local government, education and criminal justice and the NHS. So a huge, varying career. Alex, thank you so much for joining us today.
Very happy to be with you.
And I wonder if we can maybe start with, because I'm aware that some people joining us might not have read the report, and it would maybe be good just to get a bit of a sense of what's in there and what it's about. So
we commissioned this report in the Diversity and Inclusion group because we were doing a bit of a retrospective, you know, how far have we come, what difference have we made, and as you said, the timing of the report has turned out to be very opportune in the sense that, unfortunately, an incredibly sad and distressing incident has meant that this report, it's not the first report that we've ever produced, but this report has got a lot more attention than the previous ones. But what we wanted to assess for ourselves was the difference that had been made in the last 10 years since the group has been around, and we had been hearing, if you like, through the sort of grapevine that the situation was not heading in the right direction. You know, we were getting feedback from the network of people that we speak to, which includes the Taylor Bennett Foundation practitioners who potentially have because their experiences is guided and managed and supported, a better overall experience. So if some of that group are giving you feedback saying, you know, that there's something that you need to look at. So we were expecting, I guess, not fantastic news, but we were very disappointed by what we got. And what we got really is what the report tells us, is that in a sense, the issues that we were facing, which were writ large, you know, 10 years ago, that we started talking about, which felt quite overt, very visible. It's almost like now they are being managed. You know, they're less visible outwardly, but they exist, but they exist in a different way. So the report talks about microaggressions, which is a phrase that, you know, you may or may not be familiar with, but and it's a phrase that kind of tries to encapsulate the things that have become normalized, that you can't quite put your finger on, but there is something uncomfortable, certainly, for the person who feels that they're on the receiving end of a microaggression. And the example, I have one that's not directly actually related to PR, but when I was doing my degree, I was a mature student, and for months on end, when I first started, I was not being invited to some of the kind of evening things, you know, the drinks in the bar and stuff. And I thought, I'm trying to be a bit self-aware. Is it me? You know, shall I just check myself? It wasn't me. But what I did find out after a couple of months was I wasn't being asked, because there had been a widespread assumption, because I did my degree when I was 24, so I was a bit older, that I had children. I must be a single parent. So everyone in my group, in my year, had assumed that I had a child, or possibly two. When I kind of probed this a bit, you know, I lived in Southwest London, I was black, I was a woman, ergo I must be a single parent. So if I'm doing my degree at 24, you know, a child got in the way. And that doesn't feel aggressive, does it? It's just it was actually a group of people trying to do the right thing, not to put pressure on, thinking, oh, she's probably a single parent, hasn't got a lot of money, don't want to keep asking her to go to the bar because then she's going to feel terrible. Microaggressions don't necessarily come from an aggressive place or a bad place, but what they are is a manifestation of perceptions, stereotypes, assumptions, a whole range of things that you just don't notice. You just don't notice until you do. And once you do, and if you're on the receiving end of them, they feel very personal, and they feel almost like, you know, tiny little kind of cuts, you know, death of 1,000 stabs.
Yeah.
Because they're everywhere, often. In companies, businesses, organisations, because they're part of the landscape. They're not the overt, you know, where do you come from? You know, North London. I mean, where do your parents come from? That's the kind of stuff that, you know, Black and Asian people would kind of quote, that would be irritating. But now it's the sort of, you know, it's the assumptions that people almost don't speak about, but they act on. So I'm just looking here at some of the examples that they were, you know, people make about personality types. So if you're African, you'll be, you know, loud, like bright colours, you know, all that kind of stuff. And so you might even just ask a colleague for advice about something on the assumption that would be their particular style. Yeah. And that person's sitting there all in grey, never worn a brightly coloured t-shirt, but you don't see that, if that makes sense.
It's so much harder to spot in some ways from the outside, I think. It's something much more subtle. And
it is. And in a way, it's difficult in PR because we work on, we often work in stereotypes, don't we?
Yeah.
We categorize, we have markets, we segment our markets, we give them characteristics and we label them as such. And that's part of our jobs. We do that all the time. And that feels quite normal. So you could ask yourselves I think quite legitimately, why is it okay to do that over here, but yet it's not okay to do that over here? Well, the reason why it's not okay to do that over here is because the impact that that has on people's development, on their self-esteem, on their relationships with colleagues, etc., is, it can be very damaging. And the best way to kind of counter that, or to address it, in my view, really, is to have a culture where you can talk about all this stuff.
Yeah.
In the same way that you might talk about, certainly recently, or a few months ago, I was having conversations with colleagues about the gender kind of debate around, trans women and cis women and all of that. All of these issues are around gender equality, diversity. They're not simple. If they were simple, we would have cracked all this years ago. We wouldn't be wouldn't be here today.
I think. Oh, sorry. I was going to say. I think one of the things that I was certainly quite shocked about reading in the report was the some of the more overt racism as well.
Yeah.
There was a story that really struck me about someone who had experienced a racist client, and then the response from the agency was to essentially take the person off the account rather than addressing it with the client. Is that kind of behaviour?
This is really disappointing, and this was one I think when we were chatting earlier in the week, Sean. This is one of the stories that one of the very first events that we did when we were just a working group about 10 years ago. We had an event, and we had a young Eastern European. She happened to be, I think she might have been Polish. Practitioner describe a situation where her boss had basically said, look, we're not going to take you to the next meeting with the client because they don't like your accent, they find you really difficult to understand, and they've asked for a team of people with English as a first language. And she was talking about this experience, and as she was talking about it, she was getting more upset, and there were a few tears. But the impact on somebody of saying to them, because of this thing about you, this characteristic which you cannot change, the colour of your skin, the way that you speak, your country of origin, we have accepted that this other person has a problem with that, and we will be complicit in that racism, which was very overt. And it's not the first time I've heard stories like that. Is to me, it's one of those defining moments. If you run an agency, and we're all kind of grown up enough to know that a client need not come out and say blatantly, I don't want any Asians in this, or I don't want any whatever in this. They're never going to say that. Because if they did, frankly, it would be easy for you to get up and walk away. That would be easy. You could just say, I'm not, that's not acceptable, I'm off. But they don't do that. And so the challenge really is that when you recognise it and when you see it by the way that things are framed, and when it's wrong, you have a moment where you can challenge that client. You can harness those PR skills and try and persuade them to do things differently. So you can continue with that work, or actually you can say to them, actually, that's not how we do things. That's not, if we go out and we produce this commercial for you, or we do this piece of work for you, there will be representatives from all parts of the community. We will talk to X, Y, Z because that makes sense to achieve what you want. There've been plenty of times when we've been producing collateral for clients, and they'll point us in certain directions to do things, and you know, at some point, you know, certainly in London, the situation may be different in Scotland. And I'd be interested in actually in this conversation to hear from other people about some, you know, what they think some of the challenges are. But we you know, they might say, oh, can you go and film on this event? So I worked in a borough once where they wanted us to film an event, and the event it was a community event, but traditionally in the borough, there was an event, a Mela, which was attended by the Asian community in volume, and another event, which was predominantly attended by sort of the white British, Caribbean, you know, basically everyone who wasn't Asian community. So you know, in a situation where the client was saying, well, can you just do this event? And we were saying, well, actually, your population is kind of 50-50. If we just do this event, we'll miss out. And they were saying, well, no, because we don't want to pay you. And we were saying, well, actually, you know what we'll do? We'll do half of this and half of that. We won't charge you any extra, you know, because this is right for you politically. It was a local authority. This is right for you politically, and you need to do it this way. So we were quite persistent about it. They didn't want us to film the Asian event because they felt that the borough was being perceived in a certain way that didn't accurately reflect what it was. So basically, as too Asian. This is a conversation with an officer and an elected member, which is very interesting. But that's your choice. You know, you can either say, okay, fine, and walk out of the room and do exactly what they say, or you can say, actually, I don't think that's going to really be right for you, and this is why. And if they still want to do it, you then have another choice to make about whether or not it's serious enough for you to walk out the door. It's not easy, because now, in this particular period, making those kinds of choices, potentially turning down work or having a conversation that might lead to you not getting work on the grounds that you feel that your client, you know, either has views that you don't agree with or wants you to do something you don't want to do. That's not easy.
I guess it's part of our role as consultants, though, isn't it, to challenge what we're being presented with, and to provide advice to improve.
You treat it as you would if they were saying to you, I don't know, if they were saying, you know, if they wanted you to do something that was illegal, you know, or they wanted you to fiddle your invoice, you know, you would, you know, put your foot down, you know, but I guess it's for each person, it's for each individual and each agency, each organisation, to make those decisions for themselves, to look at their, for example, the way that they appoint people and recruit people, and make a conscious decision to do something different, and then follow it through.
I see that there's a couple of messages coming through in the chat box in support of what you're saying. Everyone should speak out against things like this. Not speaking makes a person complicit in the racism and injustice. Absolutely.
I mean, I think you have that conversation with yourself, with your team, etc. You decide what your limits are, and I think, you know, as I say, I don't take it lightly, that decision around, you know, if you're pitching for something and somebody says we pitched we pitched a few months ago for a local authority where the people in the room were absolutely, I don't know what was wrong with them, but they were absolutely horrible. They were really rude, just really dismissive, you know, talked all over us when they had asked us to answer a question, and then stopped us from answering the question. Afterwards, one of the people, there was about 8 or 9 people that from the local authority concerned, and afterwards one of them called the MD of the other agency that I work with quite a lot, and apologised for the appalling behaviour of his colleagues. And I realised afterwards that I was the only woman in the room, and I was the only black person in the room. And I got a particularly difficult time off these guys, because the thing that I was talking about, which was the programme that I'm on now, working on now, is around digital transformation and comms and engagement in that kind of programme world, which I've done many, many times. But this guy was incredibly rude to me, more so than even, he was rude to everybody, but just dismissive of in particular of me in his presentation. And then this guy said, and I'd please extend our apologies to Alex. You know, the behaviour was appalling and we're really, really, really sorry. Like this. And afterwards I was thinking, this is incredible. You know, this is 2020. You know, you've got somebody who, you know, who you've got a situation where you've got a colleague calling up to apologise for, you know, basically being, he was very aggressive. I said something about Waltham Forest because I live in Waltham Forest, and he just assumes that I didn't know what I was talking. You know, like it's that kind of, I mean, that's the overt kind of stuff where you're dismissed on the grounds that you don't fit the profile, and that's and those that is a, well, it's a macroaggression in my book, where you take a look at somebody and you make a whole series of assessments about their capability, about their point of view on life, etc., and their knowledge. I mean, I look like I look, but I do a lot of work in the technical. I don't wear a grey suit. I don't have, you know, I don't have gravitas. I've been, you know, God knows what that is.
I know there are these phrases though, gravitas, or whether someone's a fit culturally. Like,
yeah, I mean,
behind them, but
our world is full of that stuff, isn't it? It's really full of that stuff, and it's really full of that stuff in agencies. And you know, like I look at occasionally, I've noticed, I've a case to look at kind of the pictures we all have. I mean, you know, mine are particularly grim, but you know, you look at these. If you're let's say you're kind of in your mid-30s and a black and minority ethnic PR practitioner, and you're looking for a job, you know, you fancy a move into agency. Maybe you're working on a paper or a magazine, or you're doing some social stuff, and you want to work with an agency. You start to look at agencies that you might be interested in. So you Google them, you land on their staff page, team page, and you can do that. I did that exercise when we did, just before we published the report, and I think it hasn't really changed. You just see a sea of very similar faces and types. It's like people employ people they want to go for a drink with on a Friday night, and if you employ people that you want to go for a drink with on a Friday night, then you're not going to employ anyone who doesn't drink. So by definition, you probably will not be looking at employing very many Muslims or Seventh-day Adventists or Jehovah's Witnesses or any other particular religion where they don't drink. I don't know if all those religions don't drink, by the way. I'm just saying as an example. Or you know, you'll miss out on you know, people who have families, who, I mean, it's not just the race, it's a whole range of diversity, and it just doesn't make any sense to actually put that desire to have a team of people who think and act and behave like you or everyone else in your organization, because without that diversity, without that inclusiveness that's out there, you're literally just talking to yourselves. And I'm convinced that when those stories where you hear where agencies miss the mark, or especially in the public sector, which they do often, more often than you would think, it's because they don't have diverse teams. It's because they just don't get it from the beginning.
And I guess, so we caught up earlier in the week just as part of our kind of preparations for this, and I know that one thing we spoke about was the challenge around senior hires that allow you to reach people from a more diverse range of backgrounds. So Taylor Bennett Foundation, for example, does a tremendous job at an entry level, but actually it maybe becomes slightly more complex when you are looking to broaden the diversity within your team at a more senior level. Is headhunting the solution?
I think it's got to be. I think it's got to be, because given what I've just said about the exercise that I might do looking for a more senior role, then, you know, it's not that I wouldn't I wouldn't apply for a role in an organisation where, you know, it was an all white board or an all white management team, then I wouldn't be living in the real world and I'd never get any work. But I certainly look for keywords and phrases and something about the culture that tells me that this place is going to be okay for me, that it's going to work for me. I'm now at the stage in my career where I don't really need to do that. So I'm fortunate enough that people call me up. Got called today actually about a potential role with a county council, and I'm not on that, in that bit of it. But as a more senior practitioner, there are different sets of issues. I've just mentioned the word gravitas. There's plenty of situations. There's one classic situation where I had been short. So my name is Alexandra, but I quite often use Alex. So there's quite often an assumption that I'm a white male called Alex. This is something that I don't actively seek to change a lot of the time because I find it quite interesting. So I'll have a phone call and then it'll be, you know, a slight surprise that I'm female, but that's fine. We have a conversation. So I was talking to a headhunters who are very well known and I shouldn't say any more than that, but they're very well known. And so we had a phone call. We got past a kind of long listing process, and then I went into the office to have a conversation with the recruiter. So I walked in the door, sat down. I knew he was surprised, but anyway, we had a good conversation. And at the end, towards the end of the conversation, I said to him, "Be honest with me, because this is a senior role in a county council director role. It's huge, you know, big salary, big process, you know, 2-day assessment centre, you know, staying overnight, blah blah." I said, "I'm not interested in going one step further in this process unless there is a possibility of being appointed." And I said, and I pointed out to him that in the last, whatever it was, 2 or 3 years, it was about the 4th or 5th time that they'd approached me about, and I said, "I haven't spoken to you before, but I've spoken to several of your colleagues, and I get the impression that I am a twofer, what I call a twofer. You get 2 for 1 with me. You get a woman and you get a minority if you shortlist me. But you know what? I don't have the time for this anymore. I don't have the time to be your, oh yeah, we'll get one of those, you know, I don't, and that's not what I'm about." So, and it was one of these moments where he did a quick calculation in his brain, I guess, about whether it was worth bullshitting me next or putting his hands on the table and being honest. And I pleaded with him to be honest with me, and I promised him that whatever he said, I wouldn't, you know, he wouldn't be reading about it in PR Week, because my interest was just to not waste my time. So we then had a conversation, Sean, where he said, if I'm completely honest, they want someone who looks like them. It's a Tory county council. They loved you on paper, but I think when you walk in the door, there's going to be a problem, right? So, but I appreciated that. That then led to another conversation with them. That then led. I'm not saying this is why they are the way they are. I'll just put my hands up. Green Park, okay. Green Park now, if you look them up, are extremely strong on diversity. They're really strong on that, you know, they kind of thought leadership in the search and selection field around generally, but also around, you know, PR and comms and those kinds of roles. I am sure, I'm convinced that interaction had some bearing on this particular individual, because what I said to him was, you know, what would be really great is if you could have a conversation with them about what this means potentially, you know, in terms of them not having somebody leading this key part of the local authority who has in fact been employed because they're the best person for the job.
Yeah.
As opposed to because they look like them.
Yeah.
And for me, you need to do stuff differently if you're serious about it, because I'm not going to come to you anymore. And I think increasingly, my peers, a lot more of us are doing what I do, which is going out on your own, which I did basically pretty much from day 1 of my career. I've been out on my own. I have gone in-house a few times, but then you can be sure that you're being hired for your worth.
Yeah. There's a
And
whole section of the report, isn't there, about BAME practitioners feeling that they have to go independent to be able to achieve their career goals. And
yeah. Because if you're not open enough, if you're not willing to go out and it's this thing about I do lots of recruitment campaigns in the public sector, and I'm always talking to clients about the words that they use in their adverts. So you put the word in, dynamic, creative, all these words that are great around PR, and then you have to think about what conjure up that person. You've written down those words. Be honest with yourselves. Conjure up that person. What does that person look like? And if that person looks like me, well, actually no, the person looks like me, but like 20 years younger, then you've got to go and find them, because they're doing the same exercise. They're wondering what you want, and they're looking at those words, and they're looking at your website, and they're looking at your output, and they're looking at, you at the award ceremonies and kind of all that kind of stuff. And if they don't see something that feels like it might be open to them, why would they apply? Why would they look at you? Why would they want to come and work with you? You have to reach out, and the independent practitioner world is absolutely stoked with excellent, Black and Asian, Chinese practitioners. I did an exercise the other day. In fact, I was talking to one of my, and this is the irony of it, I was talking to one of the people that I'm on the work that I'm doing now, and I said, oh, we need to get at least another 1.5 comms people in, really good ones who can hit the ground running, who know what they're doing, who are familiar with the territory. And I said, oh, let me see, let's see if I can find someone. And I kind of had a quick jumped into LinkedIn, had a quick look there, had a couple of names in my head. And when I looked at the list, every single one of them was Black and minority ethnic. Now, I wasn't doing an exercise in let's give all the Black people jobs. I was doing an exercise in who do I know who's independent, an independent practitioner who potentially is available, blah, blah, blah. All those names on that list were Black. I know many more white practitioners than I do Black practitioners, but pretty much all of the ones that I know are working independently are Black or Asian.
It's such a contrast, isn't it? And yeah. I guess reading the report, there wasn't data specifically about this, but I guess reading the report, it also made me wonder, would there be different situations for different parts of the UK? So I guess thinking about the marketplace in Scotland, so I did a bit of digging just to look at some numbers, which I'm going to read out, but in the last census, which was in 2011, the largest minority ethnic group was Asian, 3%, and then the rest of the population, apart from I think 1%, which was made up of our Black population, the rest was predominantly white. And I mean, that's 4% of our population then, but I don't see that reflected in the community in Scotland in terms of PR. And I guess it made me think that there probably are very few junior hires as well as senior hires, despite the fact that we have
you've got to create the pipeline. So 10 years ago, when we started when we were the working group, when we launched the working group, we actually launched it in which was my suggestion, but we launched it in the college. I used to work in an FE college. I was the head of communications and marketing. And I knew that in the business strand, they had a business course which had a marketing element in it. So I was chatting to some of the students about PR, and they were saying, oh, PR, what's that? So, at 16, 17, PR is confused with, not confused with, but they see it as being, about posters and leaflets and that kind of stuff, if they understand it at all. And so what I realized was actually, these kids didn't know what that was about. I was talking to two young African students one day, and they were saying, So is it a profession? What is it, miss? Is it, what kind of money can I earn in all this? And I was saying, well, talking to them about the role and everything and what kinds of work I do. And they were, oh. And then one of them said something that was very telling, which was, would my mum, what do you think? Do you think my mum would be impressed, or something like that to his friend? So, in many families in African cultures, they're really, really focused on their kids being professionals. So having a professional, being a lawyer or an accountant or something that gives them prestige and standing. And, did PR fit into this mold?
Yeah.
I was talking to a Chinese student one day, I remember, and they were saying, is this something that I could do? And I knew what they meant. Is this something that a Chinese person could do? And I said, well, why wouldn't it be? It's just like any other job.
Yeah.
And they were like, oh, I don't know. So we realised then that so one of our very, very first pieces of work was actually producing a kind of an initial information pack for young BAME people to say, this is what PR is. These are some of the people. So we had pictures of people who look like us, so they can see that there are practitioners that look like you. And this is the kind of work that we do. And then, of course, we also had to answer the all-important question for every young person, which is, this is the kind of money that we can earn.
Yeah.
Which is the question number one they want to know. But you've got to do some outreach. You've got to go, look at the colleges, look at the sixth form colleges, look at the FE colleges. Don't just look at graduates. I mean, that's my other thing. Inclusion and diversity means social inclusion. It means, employing people who don't go the traditional route. And I've certainly come across people, I'm sure you have come across people who've just got a knack for PR, who get it, who are very intuitive, who've got kind of good, who've got a good eye when it comes to visual and creative. You don't have to have gone to, a good university and have got, the right kind of degree. And I firmly believe, if Scotland wants to see more Black and Asian minority ethnic practitioners, you've got to grow them. You've got to go out and find them. You've got to engage with them. You've got to encourage them to understand what it is that you do. You've got to do a bit of demystifying, and you will find people. I've mentored now 3 BME practitioners who I think one of them had a related degree, one of them didn't have any degree, and one of them had a PR degree. And I can honestly say, in terms of talent and skill and being committed, there was no difference between the 3 of them. One might have understood the ins and outs, the language more, but in terms of actually outputs, they were pretty much equal.
The language can be learned as well, can't it, in terms of the terminology? But there's an interesting comment that's come through from one of our attendees in response to what I mentioned around the statistics for Scotland. Someone said, I think it's a mistake to go via representing minorities through percentages of population. So, for example, we shouldn't have a target to meet 4% of an organisation's workforce having BAME background. We should aim higher than this. I think the quotas is an interesting one, isn't it? Because I suppose we've seen how that started to play out, where it's been used in the kind of gender diversity field. And I know that a lot of boards, for example, will have had a maybe 50-50 split as a target for male and female boards. Is that a solution? Are quotas something that we should be considering as a kind of short-term measure to try and improve things, or is that going down the wrong route? I
think, my view on quotas is a little bit different, I guess. If you're a small organisation, because I work with a small agency, so I think you have to be realistic. So I think in a small agency, if you want to make a difference, if you want to diversify your team, you have the option to be flexible. You can look for example, we just talked about practitioners being out there. You can reach out, identify people that you can work with on specific projects and work with them, and do you know, increase your, I suppose, increase your diversity by being diverse in your thinking and being, you know, thinking a bit differently and being a bit adventurous, if you like, and a bit more creative. If you're in a, if you're, because actually the reality is that you can't afford to make, well, no one can afford to make bad hires or the wrong hires or hires for the wrong reason. And I don't want, and I never have wanted, and I don't believe I ever have been appointed just because, you know, you need to appoint people and you need to work with people who are really good at what they do. I do strongly believe that, because I don't think, you know, I don't want any favours. I don't want any favours as a woman, and I don't want any favours as a black person. And I don't think there are any practitioners out there who would want favours. What we would want is the equal opportunity, is that equal chance, is to be seen. So that goes back to, how do you start your process? Where do you look? Who do you talk to? If you're looking for somebody, you know, do you go to the same people you always go to say, do you know anyone? Or, you know, have you got any idea, you know, do you, or would you consider, you know, doing an ad that says you don't need to have experience, we're not going to treat you like a trainee, but if you've got a portfolio of stuff, or if you've been doing stuff in the voluntary capacity, lots of BAME practitioners that I know, in fact, it's how I started without any qualifications, was doing community theatre. So I was doing like publicity for a community theatre in Hackney, and I used to do all the posters, and then I realised I had a bit of a knack for it, literally, and you know, that kind of thing. So you know, just be creative. You know, if you see campaigns out there on social media where, you know, somebody's organised a rave and the artwork is brilliant and the PR looks great, and that's all organic, but there are a group of people doing that, well, go and find out who they are. Yeah. You know, or just you know, don't speak to the same people, because you will just get the same results.
Yeah. Love that. I guess, and I suppose in terms of other practical steps, because I suppose that was part of what the session was about, wasn't it? And are there other practical steps that people should be thinking about, that agencies or in-house teams can think about to be more inclusive? Yeah,
so I think what happens is that sometimes you get work, you get contracts, or you're pitching for something where there'll be something explicit about, you know, about the community, and, you know, reaching out to all parts of the community, etc., all that kind of stuff. And when you get briefs like that, those tend to be the only times that you look at, say, the range of social media channels and media that would be speaking to Black and minority ethnic audiences, right? So you'll get that, and then you'll have a look, and then you'll see, oh yeah, we've got this channel, we've got that channel. So don't do it just then. Do it the way you do it with other mainstream media or social media channels. Do it all the time. Pay attention all the time, because, you know, there are people and stuff happening all the time that you could be looking at. You don't have to be, I mean, I live in a world where everything, you know, but, you know, the majority of the stuff that I look at and read is produced by people who aren't like me. But it doesn't mean that I'm not interested and I can't engage with it and I don't learn stuff from it. So why wouldn't the reverse be true? Yeah. That makes sense. So don't just look at those channels, that media. You know, everyone's looking now because of Black Lives Matter. And you know, I know, because I've been here before, been wearing this t-shirt for a long time, the kind of fuss will die down, and then it'll go back to how it was before, where you'll struggle to get purchase if you want to have a conversation about diversity and inclusion. And there is a moment now where you can start to do things differently, and you can start to do things differently in a way where you're embedding those things. So add a couple of channels to your regular kind of, you know, Monday or Friday evening, or however you do it, kind of peruse, whether you do it on the loo or in the back garden or whatever. We all do it. You all know what I mean. You know, and rotate them maybe for a while. Just familiarize yourself with the territory, you know, so that if you're looking for a hires, you've got different places to start looking, that you understand what is important to those communities, that you know, you have a deeper understanding of the debate, that you can have those conversations within your, and I don't, you know, I talked about this a bit in the CIPR when we launched the report about how hard it is to have some of these conversations and how uncomfortable it is. And I mentioned this Channel 4 dispatch. I don't know if it's still on the player actually, because I don't tend to stay for that long, but you know, where you've got young kids who we always assume are less kind of worn down with stereotypes, and indeed they are, being really distressed at just the prospect of talking about race because somebody might think they're racist. So I realise as a black person, in a way, and I know that there are different views about this, but I don't want to make it difficult for people to have those conversations. I don't want to be offended if they say things that others might find offended, because I'd much rather that we had the conversations. Yeah. I'd much rather that we're honest. Doing really hard things like looking at the last, whatever, how many times you've appointed. Did you have any black minority, black or Asian candidates? Did anyone apply? Did you even think about it? Did you even discuss it? Did you care before, whatever, 8th of June, before George Floyd? Be honest, because actually that's really important. So I've had lots of people reaching out to me in the last few months. I've been laughing because I've been on LinkedIn for 10 years and I feel like people have just discovered that I'm black. So you know, recruitment agencies that I've never heard of have been, you know, pinging me, not non-stop, but I've had a few. We all have, all of the people that I'm talking to you about, my solo practitioners. We had a good laugh about it, you know, because it's funny, because we've always been black, but it's like people just noticed.
I guess in some ways it's reassuring that at least there's a change and people are waking up to this, but gosh, it's taken so long to get to this point. And
it's taken a long time, and it's time to kind of stop being nice about it as well. And it's time for all of us to not be offended by it, because we just need to have these conversations. We need to be really honest about it. We need to be, if you know, this is going to, you know, and I've been saying more, pushing the boundaries a bit more, but I was talking to a really good friend of mine who's Nigerian, and he's got a strategy of just saying to people, just in case you're wondering, you know, I am honest. I don't have any scams going on. I don't have, you know, like, and I said, how's that working for you? So there's I don't know if this is one of the stereotypes that exist in Scotland, but certainly in London, there's a stereotype around, in particular, Nigerians and financial scams and dodgy dealings. And this guy's a really, 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 really good designer, and he runs his own business and everything, blah blah blah. And he says now that he'll just say, you know, he just tries to make a joke of it. And he said it's always interesting because, you know, people respond in such wildly. Some people are terribly embarrassed and claim not to know anything about this horrible stereotype, and, you know, and other people are like, oh, you know, embarrassed. And every now and again he gets somebody who says, oh, why do you think you need to say that then? And they actually have a conversation about it. Yeah. And then he will say, honestly, it's because I'm concerned that people will look at me and wonder if I'm honest. So there's a part of me that thinks I should just make a joke of it and see what happens. So no one's got this right. We're all feeling our way. We're all trying to get to a point where we don't have to think about it anymore. And it's a conversation I was having with some friends about the trans issue. You know, when we get to that point where we don't need to talk about this anymore, really, or very much, or it's all, you know, we all know where we stand and it's all fine. For the trans community is you know, way off, because we've got some issues around, you know, fundamental issues around sex and genetics and all that kind of stuff. And we were actually talking about the differences in a way that those issues in a way feel harder than the race issues, because they are so fundamental to, I mean, the colour of our skin is important, but as you know, as I would say to anyone, is the colour of my skin isn't me. You know, it's not all I'm about. But you know, I'm much more about probably being female than I am about being black, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So we've got a whole range of these issues that we need to think through. But I think as PR practitioners, we must do that. Because this is what we do, talk to communities, sell stuff to people.
Yeah, and as you say, you need that conversation to get started, and equally for action to come from it. You know, it's not enough just for us to continue talking about this for another 10 years, but actually, what is the action today?
Yeah, we've had turnover in our agency of 5 people in the last 2 years. So 5 people have left, and the 5 people that replaced them have been exactly like the 5 people before. Right? We refuse to be in that position again from now on. So what are we going to do about it? And you know, I've suggested a few things. Just talk, extend your network, do things differently. Look at the ad that you wrote last time. Look at the copy that you produced, right? And be honest about what you know. What kind of person would you think would respond to that? Because the chances are it'd be somebody just like you. So how do you make that different? You know, you be honest. I mean, we love honesty, don't we? You know, amongst ourselves, we don't like it much. We like a bit of honesty, I think, and that will reap rewards. It might also result in you going home and kind of beating yourself up a bit every now and again. About stuff that you may have said or done or thought in the past, in the same way as I think I said to Sean, in the same way that I've had to come to terms with my aggression towards Volvo drivers, who I'm definitely, if there was an ism for it, then I would be it. I would be an ist. I would be a Volvoist, and I would have to deal with that. And I won't explain to you why I particularly have a thing about Volvo drivers, but we have all got them. And we must acknowledge them, and whether they're about age, whether they're about race, whether they're about sexuality, whatever. And if we don't do that, I don't think we can say that we any actions that you plan won't work, because you haven't done that first bit about really being honest about it.
Yeah.
You know, about how you would feel about that person in the office who doesn't go down the pub with you on a Friday, right? You're going to make judgments about them in terms of, you know, their ability to be part of your culture. What does that even mean? Yeah. You know, so the talking bit is important, and it is action if it means that you go home that night and think, wow, okay, I hadn't really thought about that before. I'm not suggesting you go in the next day and you're going to be a completely different person. All I'm saying is that first step of self-awareness is a big one, and it's an important one. Because then you don't walk into the trap, you know, of doing the same thing again.
Alex, I'm conscious of time. It is just a few minutes till 2. I don't know if there are any questions from the people that are watching. Just give it 1 wee second. I did want to just mention that if anybody is interested, the link that Chris shared around the report also includes a link through to the Blueprint initiative, which is a way to measure and track progress.
Yeah, that is one thing you could do in practical terms, but I have to warn you, it is a very tough, isn't it? It's a very tough specification and set of hurdles for you to jump through.
Yeah.
But by all means, please use that. It's a brilliant piece of work by Elizabeth and the gang, and it's a really, really good place to start thinking and focusing on what you can do.
Brilliant. Well, I think that's probably us for today, unfortunately. I think I could probably talk about this all afternoon with you, Alex. You're just fascinating, and there's so much that you've discussed today that has made me think differently about taking things into the future. For the people who've joined today, and for anybody who's watching the recording, I hope that you enjoyed today's session. We have a few others that are coming up. Next Thursday, I'll actually be hosting another conversation, this time with Kirsten Urquhart from Young Scot, who will talk about engaging young people through emerging platforms like TikTok. later on in the month, on the 20th of August, we've got 3 of Scotland's top influencers discussing how the pandemic has transformed influencer content and engagement. And then on the 10th of September, we have market research agency 56 Degree Insight talking about how Scottish consumer behaviours changed in 2020. For now, I'd just like to say a massive thank you to you, Alex.
I was in Scotland, so don't get that much activity here.
We like to keep a good schedule going, yeah. But thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great, not a problem.